Hey, it's Mark and Pete.
Welcome to the show. It's Mark and Pete. Colourful conversations. And today's topic is the North-South divide. Well,
Aye.
Indeed. Now, it's quite interesting as a topic, North-South divide, because the term North-South divide generally refers to the perceived economic and cultural differences between southern England and the rest of Great Britain, which would include, for example, Northern England, Wales and Scotland. Now, I do believe, in my opinion, that there is a significant difference.
I believe in your opinion as well.
Well, you should do, because particularly for somebody who lives in the south.
Yeah, well, yes, I do.
As opposed
I own up to that.
Those people who come from the north.
Yes.
Now, if you look at it, I think there's a clear distinction between, for example, health conditions. I mean, let's face it, southerners are generally much more healthier. I think that's my opinion. Whereas, say, for example, house prices. I mean, it's fairly obvious that people in the south are living in a bubble, and not just necessarily on house prices. And I think it's generally assumed that people in the north are living perhaps with less earnings capacity, maybe. That's how it's perceived. Possibly that maybe the government isn't spending as much. It could be that, there's a political difference.
Well, let's just look at those few points that you've raised just in a little more detail. Now, they could be related to each other.
They could be.
In that health conditions is being healthy related to what your income is, because you can afford healthcare. You can.
Yes.
So although living a healthy lifestyle, you could say, well, you can do that whatever your income. You can eat vegetables and go for a run, whatever your. But not necessarily at the same time.
No.
But preferably not at the same time.
Well, I find that causes indigestion.
Well, yes. It could also cause wind, which could help with your speed running. Let's be frank. Yes. But what I was thinking was that if you can, if something goes wrong with your health, you're then able to treat it more easily if you're wealthier.
Yes, but would you not say, though, that if you're more affluent, as some of the people are perceived to be in the south, that you can afford better quality food, better living conditions, whereas people in the north, for example, maybe don't have as much resources?
Well, you see, now, I can see that there are some very wealthy people in the south, more so than in the north, some extremely wealthy people. Some would say obscenely wealthy people in the south.
Or just obscene.
Obscene and wealthy people in the south. But you were talking about house prices. House prices are more. The fact that there are more wealthy people means that things cost more. So there's a little bit of a kickback there, in that it's the market is allowing for the fact that the people are wealthier.
Well, yeah.
So therefore if it puts up prices, to finish my sentence, so that means I sort of interrupted myself there. Stop interrupting me. I'm sorry. That Peter Cooper, he's always interrupting me. Can you have a word with him, please?
Yes.
The problem with the thing is with house prices. If house prices are put up because in the south relative to the north, because there are more wealthy people there, that means if in the south you have a low wage, you actually are worse off in the south because you can't afford to buy anywhere to live.
Well,
that was my point. You were disadvantaged by being in the south.
I think you managed to confuse yourself in that.
Yes.
However, I would summarise it by saying this. It's true, it's possible that you could say that people's salaries are commensurate with market rates. But there is a problem with that, and that's why I refer to the bubble, because somebody from the north would find it extremely difficult to break into the south. So if they, for example, had developed their career in the north, their salaries and their whole resources are going to be commensurate with where they live. And of course, this is as a general point, but for somebody who's living in an average house, say Bradford, trying to break into, a property market in Wimbledon is going to be exceedingly difficult. So there is an obvious north-south divide there, and it's almost becoming its own little eco-climate there, really. I mean, everything from, the fact that it seems to be colder and more more grim up north, where it seems to be more affluent,
Well,
and it seems to be more sort of sunny, both from an economic point of view, from a social point of view. Would you not agree?
Well, there is this idea of being grim in the north, and I suppose it's there's in your mind or in people's minds there is a connection because of the sound between grim and grimy.
Yes.
And the north, in that sort of picture of it, is associated with the big manufacturing cities,
Yes.
which in the past were very grimy.
Yes.
Because of pollution from the factories. But whereas a lot of the north of England is actually countryside.
Yes,
I mean,
exactly.
and the beautiful hills of the Lake District, in which it's not that densely populated. Although some Southerners would argue its population is dense, but that's another story for later.
Clearly.
The area is not all these big cities, so it is a stereotype, a stereotypical stereotype.
Well, that's
to say that it's grim up north. But the points that you make are right. I mean, it is colder, and so that can make it seem grim, especially struggling through the winter months.
Yes.
So yes, it can feel grim.
Let's take that point about stereotypes, because people do have perceptions of what a northerner would be and what a southerner would be. So for example, a typical stereotype of a northerner might be somebody who would be cloth caps and whippets, or say sort of a little bit more brash and arrogant, perhaps a little bit more down to earth and straight, blunt talking. And the usual things of Eccles cakes, black pudding, and warm beer. Maybe impoverished and underpaid. I mean,
yes.
I don't know whether you feel the same way. I mean, let's take this.
Do I feel impoverished and underpaid?
Well, you look it, but that's a different matter. So,
I feel that Northerners are impoverished and underpaid? Well, I think that there's a mix in the. I think that that life in the countryside there isn't so much of a north-south divide. That's my take on it. That a farmer in the south and a farmer in the north would have a lot of the same issues.
Yes.
And it's a big part of how their success as a business goes will be to do with EU regulation, which is uniform across the country. In fact, across Europe. So that it's different to in the cities, where because there used to be big manufacturing bases up in the north, and now the manufacturing has reduced a lot. I mean, there are still big companies up in the north, still a lot of things made, but there are far fewer people working in heavy industry than there used to be.
That's true.
And because of that, you've got a big city without so much of the purpose for which it was created.
Yes.
So you remove a lot of the wealth generation from the city, from these large businesses, and therefore it's grim up north, because you can't get a job. You're less likely to be able to get a job up north because of those economic factors which derive from the change in industry, particularly reduction in the amount of heavy industry.
And to that point is that we've, as a nation, seem to have moved more towards service-based industries, so hence the banking and insurance industries, which means that obviously places like London have prospered even more.
Well, and the banking, yes, in London, but also the stock exchange in London becoming such a big financial centre. Now, I have to say that I was quite surprised that that London became such a success, because a modern stock exchange depends a lot on use of computing power.
Yes.
Well, I just assumed that they'd mess it up.
Well, you could argue that they have.
Oh, well,
if you look at the state of the nation.
Well, they may have messed up in terms of enforcing regulation of deals. The problems with subprime mortgages, for example, in the banking. If we're talking about banking,
that was more problem. Driven by America, of course.
Yeah, but it was allowed.
Yes.
But what I was thinking was, I just this is my personal prejudice. I thought that as an English person myself, English people would mess up the implementation of putting in implementation of a
You're talking
of a
about
computer
technology,
system.
aren't
Yes,
you?
I
Right.
thought that technology would bamboozle the people.
Well, that's probably because you're just a Luddite.
Yeah, well, that's probably- yes, yes.
You're one of
No,
those. You're like one of
the
those.
Luddites were English, weren't they?
Well,
Also-
you're one of those Northerners wandering
Were they?
down, marching, the Barrow Marchers, wandering down for workers' rights.
However, it does
Yes.
seem to have become
Ah,
a success.
it is a
centre.
success.
Yes, it is a success. I mean, I was similarly surprised when the BBC became a reputable news agency for a time.
Yes,
It
but
may have lost a bit of its.
guess what?
bit
They've
of its,
moved their headquarters
reputation at the
now,
moment.
so they're moving up to Manchester.
Yeah, no, I suppose.
So
yeah,
there you go.
Here we are. So I've
Has
just
the
surprised
tide
myself
turned?
there. Oh, yes, I actually said something that was really relevant. I thought I was just making a side point, but
Well, there's always a first. Congratulations.
so they moved to Manchester, right?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Yes.
And Manchester's in the north.
At the moment it is, yes. Until they
No.
decide to bring it down
Well,
south.
if the BBC now we're going to deal a bit later, I think,
Yes.
with accents and culture, but it'd be interesting to know whether there'll be the change in the meaning of BBC English
Oh, absolutely.
if it's
Yes.
actually with
This
a Mancunian
is the
accent.
BBC.
If it's been in Manchester,
It is now
the
in
BBC
Manchester.
announcers will have to all have a Manchester accent.
Well, to that point, and I think
Yes.
this is something we could use as a segue, as they say, to something which I think is also an issue, because I do find it very difficult to understand certain Northerners. So, with that in mind, here is a simple clip which illustrates accents from the north. So, that was a typical Northerner speaking in a media interview. Now, I don't know about you, but I didn't understand a single word of that.
Well, they were talking to me, not
Well,
not,
I don't
not
understand a single word you say,
not
but
the-
I also didn't understand what the postman said.
I thought you might be talking to our listener.
Oh, I don't
you can't-
understand what they are talking about either.
But please do tweet us if you understood what he said. We'd like to know. Now, how do they get in
What-
touch
what
with
I
us on
said?
Twitter? How do our lovely listeners get in touch with us? Twitter is the best, I think we decided. So it's at Mark and Pete. At Mark and Pete, and that'll get to us. You could even hashtag Mark and Pete. We're not proud. We'll even take a hashtag.
We'll take
So
hash
it's-
anytime.
Yeah, well, you speak for yourself, mate. But I could understand a little bit, but it wasn't just an accent; it was a dialect, and it was introduced as being a dialect. One of the men, not the postman, the other man, spoke with a stronger dialect, and he. So they were using different words, not just the other man. We used different words, not just spoke with an accent.
Well,
So
I think
he had
that's
some
now
different
you're getting
phrases.
into colloquialism. Because
Yeah,
at the end
yes.
of the day, this is where there is yet again a reinforcement that there is a strong north-south divide. So what you're saying there is that there is actually a different language almost.
Yes, I mean it's well, this is the reason that it's called a dialect rather than a language. It's based on English and English grammar, but there are lots of phrases that are used that aren't understood not just out of the north, but out of a certain area.
Yes.
So that in Yorkshire there'd be certain phrases that we used which would be different to that in Lancashire or different in different areas. So.
That is interesting because, of course, in the south, Southerners made a deliberate point, of course, of actually having language as a barrier. So, for example, Cockneys, with the Cockney rhyming slang, created in the Victorian era this whole new language, which some people, even in the south, find very, very difficult.
Yeah, so
to work out.
I mean they're deliberately marking themselves out as different. But I think that subconsciously, that is always the case with jargon and words that are used that are specialist. You have an excuse for using them. Oh, we just came up with that because. But in the end, it's used.
The Cockneys did it obviously to try and avoid the police from understanding.
Yes.
What they were talking about.
They were the sort of illegal traders on the street.
Exactly. Yeah. So there was actually a cultural revolution taking place then.
Yeah.
Now today, that seems to be embedded in our language. So, for example, if somebody said, "Would you get on the dog and bone and talk to me?" Well, I mean, obviously, if you did that literally, it
If
would be very
our
messy.
listeners who aren't English, maybe they didn't understand that. But I mean, talking about a dog and bone, you know that it means phone because
Exactly.
it's rhyming slang. And plates of meat are feet.
Yeah.
And there's various
Mince
others.
pies, eyes.
Eyes, yeah.
Yes.
And to take a look is a butcher's hook.
Yes.
And in fact, people often who aren't from London at all will say, "I'll take a butcher's" at
Yes.
that, meaning
Oh,
I'll
yes.
take a look. So
Yes.
yeah. Now that what's interesting that to me is we started off talking about northern stereotypes there really, and northern accents and the stereotypical northern accent. What's that like? But we included a Cockney accent.
Yes.
Because what the divide is really is between the poor and the rich.
Exactly.
You know, it's class distinction.
It is class, and we haven't mentioned that word class, because
No.
if we were to talk about north and south divide, really what we are talking about is this class distinction. And that typically tends to be a very British trait. Now, you do not see that normally in other countries. It does happen, but it seems to be quintessentially English.
It does. Now, when you talk about politics in Britain, sometimes class is referred to. You have the middle class and working class, and then you have the
Upper class.
we have the upper class at the top, and some people they're also referred to as an underclass. That is, people who can't get a job, so
Yes.
they end up being trapped in the poverty trap. That would be
Yes.
sort of an underclass. So that's sometimes referred to, but yet upper class is nobility. So we would be talking about kings and queens and people with inherited land and that sort of thing. And then you'd have the middle class, which is all levels of people in professions. But we also tend to include in that businessmen and that sort of thing.
So what would you sort of typically think of a southerner? So if I was to say, what would be a typical, stereotypical southerner, I think sort of like, bowler hats and umbrellas, maybe sort of slightly snooty and aloof, and perhaps somebody who maybe sort of green wellies and sort of Land Rovers, more affluent and sort of slightly overpaid.
Yeah, I guess I would think that. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, so that was a southern stereotype.
Yes.
And a northern stereotype would be.
Well, I think it's the complete opposite. Impoverished and underpaid, as I mentioned before.
Yes, but they wear different things. You said.
Well, they do.
So you got your bowler hat and your umbrella.
Yes.
Which I guess no one actually wears or carries. Well,
Very
people
rare.
carry umbrella, but bowler hat's quite rare these days.
Yes.
And the flat cap
For a northerner.
for a northerner. But actually, flat caps are now quite fashionable, so everyone wears them. And you
Yes.
get people wearing Burberry versions of them. And
Well, that's the latest trend,
yeah.
isn't it?
So
Yes,
I think that there's a change in what people wear, but certainly in Britain, the stereotype you still think of them in those terms. Yeah, and the bowler hat city gent.
Yes.
You still think of people in that way. And but the newer southern stereotype of the green wellies and the Land Rover, I guess there is that idea. But if you're in a northern city and you wore green wellies and drove a Land Rover, or did you mean a Range Rover?
It could be a Range Rover, yes.
Yeah. So in the north, you have green wellies and a Land Rover. It'd probably be that they're green because you've been wading through muck.
Yes.
And you got Land Rover because you need it to get onto the farm. So you'd think something differently if people had it. But I think that, again, what we're seeing is there is this north-south divide. It is more. There is also the nuance of, well, are you talking about working class or middle class? And then there's also you can tighten it and say, is it a north-south divide, or is it a London and home counties
Yes.
and the rest of the country divide?
Well, exactly.
And even within London, so you take the working class people, who live in London,
Yes.
who have their own culture.
But what could be more iconic, say, for example?
Taken out of it. What I was going to say, they don't really fit into it. They fit, if any, a little bit towards the Northerners. They're sort of different. They are different, but they have their own culture. But so do the different areas in the north. So I think we're talking about posh people in London and the people in the home counties.
Well, we say about posh people
are different to everywhere else.
Let's listen to a little clip about someone who is very well known in the media, and this is somebody who definitely has a southern accent.
Well, do you know, I think she spoke the Queen's English.
Well, I often think she does. Now, of course, as we all know...
That was the Queen, wasn't it?
I do believe that was, and of course I was standing throughout the whole ceremony as the national anthem was playing, but that was Queen
yes,
Elizabeth
that
II.
is a cultural thing that we in England always stand and salute whenever the Queen speaks.
Yes, exactly. And I'm hoping that my knighthood is in the post soon.
Thank you, Mum.
Yes. Anyway, so the point there is that was taken, I believe, in 1957. Now, of course, the clipped accent that you heard.
Yes, that was the first televised. That's what she was alluding to. First televised annual Christmas speech. Broadcast.
Now, of course, as you may know, although that's quite an iconic moment in broadcasting history, it's quite interesting that, of course, her accent has changed quite a lot. It seems to have been watered down a little bit. Now, of course, obviously, having lived not just, in the south, but we do tend to think of her in that way. But of course, being somebody who you would say that she's from the upper class. But does everyone who comes from upper class speak in that way? With clipped accent.
Well, I think they do, don't they?
Well, I don't know. I mean, you see today. I mean, you've got
maybe
very well known, but is upper class distinctive by the fact that they come from a certain breeding or their wealth? So, for example, you've got the modern celebrity isn't necessarily somebody who comes from the south.
Yes, I suppose by upper class you mean someone who comes from a family.
Or a titled family.
Yes, would be called a good family, a family that has inherited wealth. Whereas now, I suppose we have sort of like the new aristocracy, sort of celebrity aristocracy, who are very different people who've made their money in media, made it in entertainment industry or in sport.
I mean, you take somebody like David Beckham.
Yes.
And I wish somebody would.
Yes.
But he is obviously very wealthy, very successful, but I wouldn't describe him as having an upper-class accent.
No. Now, he would have what we probably called an estuarine accent.
Of course.
As in... as in on the estuary, but as in from Essex somewhere, maybe.
Yes.
I don't know exactly where, but he sort of Londonish, but not quite, and working class.
Yes, he would probably accept.
So so he, and yet he's extremely wealthy. So it doesn't, as in he has a very high income.
Yes.
He doesn't have the inherited wealth of lots of land that would come with certain members of the aristocracy, but he has a high disposable income, I suppose we'd say. And so he would be able to go to the same parties if he wanted to, be able to mix with upper class people, but I bet he doesn't.
Well, I don't know. I mean, he does mix with upper class. I mean, he now sort of tends to sort of frequent the more
he will go
higher class venues. He's got that ability to mix with the upper class.
That's what I'm saying. He can do. That's what I'm saying.
To well-known royal events.
He would do that because of his wealth. Yes.
Yes. I mean, he was even there at old William's wedding, wasn't he? Yes.
Yes. I'm sure at big events he'd be there. I'm just in his day-to-day life. I wonder whether he does, but I don't know. Maybe he's changed. Maybe money has changed him.
It's possible.
Yeah. Now, in talking about this, we talk about the north, south, northern and southern stereotypes in England. What we've found is that money makes a difference in that it can shift you from you're not if you're a working class. In the south, you get money. You can become almost like upper class in your experience of life.
So the real divide is actually more about what's in your pocket.
Yeah, that's what I was going to come to. And if you're in the north and wealthy, your experience of life will be very different.
Now, I was going to ask one point on that because the question then would be, where would it be best to position yourself? From for example, from a health point of view. And I'm just going to give you a statistic here because it's worth noting. So this is a study. According to a study published by the British Medical Journal, in 1965, men in the north were 16% more likely to die under the age of 75 than men in the South. However, by 2008, they were 20% more likely to. Now, that's quite an alarming statistic.
It is interesting. I wonder what is behind this increase.
Yes.
But
But that comes surely back to the point about wealth, because is it that the wealth is being drawn more to the south, so therefore they can afford more, whereas in the north they're more impoverished, their food and diet isn't as good?
Yeah.
I mean, clearly there is something in that statistic, and the British Medical Journal clearly have some concerns.
Yes, but also, I mean, but there's lots of different factors. For example, if you were used to a high-fat diet
Yes.
in the north, maybe you like to eat lots of fish and chips, then
That would be a stereotypical view.
yes, but maybe you did.
Yes, pies.
Yes, because you had a very active job, because you were in manufacturing
Yeah.
and you were lifting heavy things,
Manual.
and then manual job.
working, yes.
But then with the shift away from so much manufacturing, maybe you're still eating the same food. You're not doing as much activity, and therefore, I'm just saying I don't know if that's true. That's just conjured out of thin air. But
Yes.
what I'm saying is that there are so many factors that could affect it.
Yes.
It's difficult to say it's just because of the income that people have. But I think that I'm right in saying, though, that the divide has grown in that now it tracks it. This increase. The increase in people dying under the age of 75 between those years has tracked the increase in the disparity in income between the north and the south.
Yes.
So what I'm saying is I agree that they one tracks the other. However, that doesn't mean that one is the cause of the other. So I don't think we can read into it that it's totally the cause. There are so many different factors.
Yes.
But it could be, and it's not something that you can just sweep away and say, oh, that's not a problem. Clearly it is a problem if people are dying earlier. 20% more likely.
Yes, exactly.
That's a huge increase.
Well, that's right, and so therefore, clearly there is a trend that's happening in the 21st century, which is alarming. I mean, one of the other statistics which seems to have sort of grown more worryingly is obesity. So, for example, I think it's 1 in 4 people, adults that is, are seen as being technically and clinically obese. Mm-hmm. Now, that's actually an alarming rate. Is that simply to the point that, maybe people aren't as active as they perhaps were 10, 20, 30 years ago, which, of course, in turn means that our diets are getting worse? Or is it that actually we're just spending our way in the wrong way? Because actually people do have more money in their pockets, but really they're just not using it wisely. Now, of course, overall, I think it's quite clear that there is a north-south divide. So would we conclude by this point that as we move more into the 21st century, that there is going to be a greater divide? Is it possible that we could say that London is almost becoming its own country? That it's almost from anything within the M25, really is sort of an isolation from what's going on elsewhere.
Yes, and I was talking earlier about how London, and particularly the posh people in London, and middle-class London, and the home counties, was different culturally. But I believe there has been a change in that London has had such an influx of people from outside of the UK. It's changed the culture of the capital.
Yes.
In that, if you travel about London, you're more likely to hear someone speaking not English than English.
There's more cultural diversity.
There are more languages spoken, and this has meant a change in the culture in London. There were, with the Britain being a member of the European Union and it being easy for people to move from mainland Europe into Britain, there are more and more European people there. Now, London already had a more European culture, European manners about it than the rest of the country, and that's been exacerbated. Now, I'm not saying that's necessarily a bad thing. Mm-hmm. You could say it's a good thing, you could say it's a bad thing. What I'm saying is it's something that is noticeable.
Yes.
That London is different culturally and has grown further apart from the
Well,
rest of the country.
Taking that point, is that a good thing for the United Kingdom? So here's an example. We're on the cusp of some key decisions that are going to be made. Scotland is due to vote as to whether it should be independent in a very short space of time. If it does, of course, that's going to change the dynamics. And if Scotland does become independent, that puts a greater power base to London. If it remains as part of the United Kingdom, it pretty much sort of carries on the way we've been talking. So the question then is that does that mean that, in the near future, we as a nation, that is the United Kingdom, will change quite considerably if Scotland goes independent?
I do think that if Scotland goes independent, that will mean that London has a far bigger impact on England, because London is just massive compared with the rest of Britain, and as soon as you make it a bit smaller, proportionally, London becomes bigger as part of Britain. So just its sheer size makes it have an impact. Then that it's wealthier, and a lot of the people in it are wealthy, far more than in the rest of the country. And then the fact that it's the political centre of the country.
Yep.
It's going to have a bigger impact. And part of that impact would be to increase even more the north-south divide.
Yeah.
So that would probably mean the rich in London getting richer and the poor in the north getting poorer, and it would be something that would need to be addressed sensitively and quickly if that were to happen, because otherwise you're going to have people from Yorkshire and Lancashire wanting to leave as well, Scotland.
Well, it's a very good point, and it's almost a very good point to end. And of course, obviously, we welcome everyone else's views. So please contact us and let us know what you think about the North-South divide. Of course, it does leave one other little question, which is, we've talked about the North, and of course, we've talked about the South, but what about the Midlands? So join us next week for more colourful conversations with Mark and Pete.
All right, see you then.